Hi everybody. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about some ideas and concepts that I think are useful for talking about questions related to like the nature of truth. The first thing is this idea of ontology. So it asks questions like what is existence? It's about asking questions about what is real. And epistemology is the how do you know part of the question. I'm going to throw a lot of stuff at you very fast, and so if you have questions or anything, just let me know. And I'm just hoping that I can throw some of these ideas at you, and some of them will stick.
Take a handful and throw it at her. Whatever sticks, that's the correct dosage.
And the reason I'm bringing them up and pointing them out to you is because I think it's important that we realize that there's this different terminology that can be used when talking about the truth. So this is just another way of describing it, and I really like the two little boxes at the bottom, how they explain ontology and epistemology. So an ontological question is, do souls exist? So it's about the nature of existence. And then epistemology is the how do you know part of the question. How can we know whether or not souls exist?
This isn't real.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
So I have this joke that comes from a David Foster Wallace talk that I think kind of illustrates what ontology is. And it goes like this. There are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" And I kind of think that the water in this metaphor is like an unquestioned ontology.
We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. It's as simple as that.
And the idea of a philosopher, or us in this class, is to try to make an effort to look at the water and examine it and ask questions about its existence and how it shapes, our behavior and our thoughts and our lives and things like that. And I have a joke also to illustrate the concept of epistemology. And it goes like this. A man is worried that his wife is losing her hearing. So he consults a doctor. The doctor suggests that he try a simple at-home test on her. Stand behind her and ask her a question. First from 20 feet away, next from 10 feet, and finally right behind her. So the man goes home and sees his wife in the kitchen facing the stove. He says from the door, "What's for dinner tonight?" No answer. 10 feet behind her, he repeats, "What's for dinner tonight?" Still no answer. Finally, right behind her, he says again, "What's for dinner tonight?" And his wife turns around and says, for the third time, "Chicken." And basically, the guy's epistemology was faulty, or he didn't test it. So I think you can see now why epistemological questions are so important, because you can, a bit like Galileo actually said in his letter, said something to the effect of, any idiot can make an observation based on what they see. And he talks about how you need, somebody who knows what they're looking at, a scientist, or in the case of the Bible, like a legit religious scholar, to be able to interpret it correctly. And so epistemology is important. So for example, if you are looking at the setting sun, there's a part where there's a bit like where the sun is the bottom end of the sun is just on the horizon, and you are looking at the sun, and so you make the observation that the sun hasn't set yet. But you have not interrogated your epistemology at all. And if you did, and you were like an astronomer or something like that, you would find that actually the sun is already set, and what you see there is an illusion. And so that, I mean, when Galileo said that in his letter, it just kind of made me think of that.
And now a question which will test your reflexes. Watch the film here of the setting sun. All I want you to do is hit your buzzer at the moment the sun has dropped below the horizon. Speed it up, obviously.
Eyelids are heavy.
It was you got there first, Phil? Well too late. Well too late. That is the moment at which the sun is below the horizon. What we see is a mirage. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. You're looking at me and you're saying, Stephen...
Is this to do with how far away it is and you're seeing...
It's to do with the bending of light and the eye not accepting it, essentially. But it is genuinely below the horizon. Physically, in other words, the Earth has turned such that it is not there. I know, you're looking very cross and upset and angry, and that can't be true about it.
But that's a film of it, though.
Yeah,
so...
I know, but you can get film of mirages, and there is nothing there. Light from the setting sun passes through our atmosphere at a shallow angle. It's gradually bent as the air density, the pressure, increases, not dissimilar to the image of your legs when you sit in a swimming pool. The effect is to artificially raise the sun in the last few minutes of its decline. And by coincidence, the amount of bending is pretty much equal to the diameter of the sun. So it's exactly as it's, there, that it's actually disappeared.
I hate this show.
Oh, Phil! Be interested in please.
The sun is there.
I know.
And you're going,
No.
it's the sun.
Not there. Mirage.
So these questions about truth, I think, ontology and epistemology, are really tightly related to the concept or the idea of knowledge. Like, what does it mean to know something? Because you can know something that's not true, theoretically, right? So, I mean, this is just more layers to think about, but especially from a more philosophical perspective, it gets real murky real fast. So now I'm going to get into the idea of multiple truths. These ideas from Kant, I think, are really interesting. This idea that there is a reality out there, but as soon as you discover it, it becomes part of the phenomenal world. So you can never know the truth because there will always be truth out there that you don't know.
There are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know.
So basically, he's saying you can never really know the entire truth. And it made me think of this cartoon that I saw where you have all these people who can't see, and they are touching the elephant, but they're touching different parts of it, so they are arguing about what the truth is, because they're all experiencing a different aspect of it. Now, just because multiple contradicting things can be true at the same time doesn't mean that all contradicting things can be true at the same time. So, for example, I don't know if any of you remember back in 2017 when this was a thing in the news, was this discussion about this competition between Republicans and Democrats about who had more people at their inauguration, Trump or Obama. And numbers were released and pictures were released, and it was pretty clear what was what. But Kellyanne Conway, who was the counselor to President Trump, said that they had alternative facts.
Giving Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that.
And however you want to interpret that, that is not the same thing as what an anthropologist or a philosopher might be referring to when they're talking about multiple truths. So the important thing about this also is that these two pictures, I would argue, not enough. And I will pose the question to you. There's lots of answers to this question, but if I was in a classroom, I would be asking you as a class what questions we should be asking about these images. Should we assume that they prove anything? Aside from being, photoshopped or fraudulent or something like that, we want to say we can see from these images that there are more people in the Obama inauguration than the Trump one. But what are some epistemological questions we could ask? How do we know for sure? Again, aside from them being like, deliberately manipulated, or the picture is from a different event, like a concert or something. Aside from that kind of stuff.
Maybe this is me as a pollster, Chuck, and you know data well. I don't think you can prove those numbers one way or the other. There's no way to really quantify crowds. We all know that.
Now, if you were to look into these images, you would find that indeed there were more at Obama's inauguration than Trump's. But but it's not real. The point is, you can accept the idea of multiple truths without accepting the idea that people can just make up anything they want, or that all perceptions are equally valid. So I just want to give you another example of how what is true is not always intuitive, but also to kind of deconstruct those categories a little bit.
I don't know what you mean by that. Can you be a little bit more specific?
So, in this picture, which panel of this object is darker, the top or the bottom? So, obviously, the top one is darker, right? But the question is, how do you know that the top one is darker?
I just know.
And the answer that I would expect for this one would be, well, I can see it with my eyes, that the top one is darker. And I would argue that that is both true and not true at the same time. And I will show you why. If you actually look at both of them, they're actually the same shade of gray. What is true? Is the top darker, or are they the same? And I say that they're kind of both true, because your brain has wired itself, it's learned over a lifetime of dealing with light and shadows, that if shadows are present the way they are in this image, then that means that the top panel is darker than the bottom one. So your brain is interpreting it correctly, I would argue.
If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
What did you just say?
Nothing, just had a little deja vu.
In fact, it's possible to argue that this is the illusion. I mean, it depends on the way you look at it. And that's like a weird question also, because color doesn't exist in the natural world like that. Color is also a construct. Color is also constructed by our brain. The way we see color. Either one could be true based on your criteria, the definitions you're using. Okay, so I've got another riddle for you. This time it's going to, the purpose of it is to illustrate a different kind of truth or knowledge. So it goes like this. A man and his son are in a terrible car accident. While the father survives with just a few scratches, his son is in bad condition and is rushed to the hospital. And there, a surgeon will have to perform a risky and dangerous operation to try and save his life. But the surgeon enters the operating room, takes one look at the boy on the operating table, and exclaims, "I can't do surgery on this boy. He is my son. How is this possible?" And I will pause here and give you a second to think about it. So if you weren't able to come up with the answer to the riddle, don't feel bad. Well, the first time I read this joke, it was in that book, Plato and a Platypus Walk into a Bar. And I thought about it for so long, and I could not get the answer to the question. And it was in the introduction to a chapter about feminism. And so I felt really bad that I didn't get the answer, and even with that context. But the answer is basically that the surgeon is the boy's mother. Another good answer is that the boy has two dads, but even then, you're still imagining the surgeon as a man, which is interesting. So, I mean, this is just another aspect of knowledge, and obviously it's related to this whole concept of implicit bias or unconscious bias. I imagine that a lot of you have come across this concept before. One of the most important, most prominent areas where implicit bias or unconscious bias is an issue is with race. And that's one of the reasons why I hope we get to talk about it more later. I think we definitely will when we talk about policing. But what I want to talk about now is how that ties into knowledge and what we think we know. So I kind of like to. This illustration, by the way, it's another cartoon representation of the guys who can't see touching different parts of the elephant. So the issue of implicit bias makes me think of what does it mean. Go back to that question of what does it mean to know something. I am choosing to break knowledge down into two different categories here. Things that you can know factually, intellectually, maybe even emotionally, the kinds of things that you're aware of, or you could know something. You could know something more intuitively or unconsciously. They're things that you don't have to think about. They're automatic. So just to use that riddle to break these two things down. Can women be surgeons? Of course, yes. You know that intellectually. If somebody were to ask you, hey, isn't it possible for a woman to be a surgeon? You would say yes.
You don't think I can be a surgeon? I can be a surgeon.
But if you had a hard time coming up with the answer to the riddle, why is that? Why didn't you just immediately think, well, duh, it's his mother? Or maybe you did, and if you did, that's interesting. But what are some things that you know, you kind of know on an unconscious level. The last concept I kind of want to introduce into this conversation about knowledge and truth and things like that is the concept of power. I think it's important to recognize the role that power dynamics play in the production of knowledge and what we all accept as being the truth. And the Galileo letter, I think, is a good example of that because it shows quite explicitly the role that power is playing in whether or not the Earth goes around the sun. And so if everyone believes that the sun goes around the Earth, for all intents and purposes, that is what's true, isn't it? Or is it? It depends there again. Also, like what your criteria is for defining the truth. But in science, including today, even today, power and money are really important factors. Not that there's not value in the scientific method and processes like peer review and things like that. Those are extremely important. But one question might be, what gets prioritized? What kind of research gets prioritized? Who gets to publish and about what and why? One good example, I would argue, is developing countries. We have all this research and knowledge done mostly by white people, by the way, white Westerners, about developing countries, and so our knowledge is based on that to a large extent, but that is very much defined by power. Who has the platform to distribute and produce that knowledge. So I will just end with some questions here. In general, I'm going to try to find more and more ways for you to participate. I think you'll find as the semester goes along that I am more interested in hearing you talk about something that is interesting to you, that you want to talk about. I don't want to hear you tell me what was in the book or what you think I want to hear. I'm much more interested in hearing about something that is pushing your buttons. And if you did make it to the end of this video, bravo. I hope it was worth it. I hope I was like at least mildly entertaining.